Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Craig Stevens, the spokesperson for Grow America's Infrastructure Now, a nationwide coalition that focuses on energy production, telecom, and the infrastructure that gets the energy and the telecommunications from one part to another. Today, I'm in Ohio, but we're going to be talking about Louisiana. Louisiana has been a really important state when it comes to energy development, energy export, and certainly seeing how the world is played out and the energy needs of the world, how North American energy is produced and then shipped to Louisiana and then exported out of Louisiana. So a very important conversation today. I'm glad you're all with us. Our keynote address is from a congresswoman from Louisiana, Congresswoman Letlow. It's great to have you here. You're breaking the gender barrier. You're the first congresswoman to be on one of our webinars, and we're so happy to have you here today. So I'm going to turn it over to you for a few moments, and then we'll have a discussion in a couple of minutes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to join this webinar. And I must say, I'm so honored to be the first woman. I like that trend. Let's keep it going. But I just wanted to say it's so important to keep this discussion going on the need for strong domestic energy sector and energy policy. And, you know, many people don't realize just how integral our energy industry is to all aspects of life. And I think when most Americans think about energy, they think of the gas in their car or the lights in their house. But this only scratches the surface. There are so many deeper levels to the importance of energy, which I know the panelists and a lot of you on this call are very familiar with. But it takes energy to produce our goods and grow our food. And more to harvest and distribute. Energy is a vital component in every step of our economy, and its cost and availability move all our economic indicators. Now, I was born and raised in Louisiana, an energy powerhouse, and now have the honor of representing Louisiana's 5th congressional district. And Louisiana has always been a leader, just like you said, in the energy sector, and especially when it comes to our oil and gas industry. Now, in 2021 alone, the industry generated $54 million in revenues for the state and helped provide thousands of jobs and good livelihoods for my state and my district. Louisiana is also a leader in liquefied natural gas exports, where we are responsible for over 60% of the LNG produced and exported from the United States. That's a huge number. And in addition, we have several proposed projects that can help fuel our leading role as a major energy exporter, one of which is the Calcasieu Pass. So Louisiana's contribution to our domestic energy sector runs deep. And as you might know, the 5th district, the one that I serve, is predominantly rural, making agriculture one of the biggest industries in the district. And it's important to note that not many people realize that certain crops can be used to produce energy and fuel. So take, for example, corn, a big crop in my district. In addition to the obvious benefit of providing produce for the country, corn can also be used to create ethanol. Ethanol, once it has been refined, can then be used to fuel the car that many rely on to get to and from work, and the trucks and machine folks in Louisiana use to run their farms. So I'm constantly sharing that story with colleagues and constituents. One often overlooked benefit is the oil and gas industry's significant financial contribution to public education. In many states, some of the revenue from the oil and gas sector is used to help fund public schools. And as a former public educator myself, I fully understand the ongoing need for additional school funding for our future generations. So oil and gas revenue is also distributed to national parks and recreational facilities through the Land and Water Conservation Fund. The LWCF program takes a portion of the revenue from one natural resource, offshore oil and gas, and puts it towards another natural resource, our land and water. The revenue goes to protect national parks and wildlife refuges, as well as local parks and recreation projects. And we can't pass over the correlation of energy security to national security. And in many ways, they truly are one and the same. The more we can move towards energy independence and rely on our own resources for the affordable energy supply that we need, the stronger our nation will become. And when we find ourselves having to increasingly import oil and gas from foreign adversaries, we weaken ourselves on the world stage. We saw how dangerous this foreign reliance can be with the onset of Russia's war on Ukraine. And when the U.S. limited imports of oil and gas from Russia and depleted our strategic petroleum reserves, we were left with a void in our energy supply. Not only that, But our allies abroad who relied on us for energy exports were also left vulnerable. And we are now facing further energy uncertainty because of what is happening in the Middle East. Unfortunately, our domestic oil and natural gas sector has been under attack since the beginning of the Biden administration. And instead of bolstering domestic energy production, this administration has focused on placing burdensome rules and regulations on the oil and gas industry. On day one of his presidency, Biden canceled the Keystone XL pipeline, a pipeline that would have transported much needed energy supply to a large portion of our nation. And in addition, the Biden administration continues to lower the threshold for onshore and offshore oil and gas leases, meaning there are less and less opportunities for growth in that sector. Right now, my Republican colleagues and I are championing new energy policies that encourage increased lease sales, increased production, and a streamlined permitting approval process. And I'm proud to say, as a sitting member on the House Energy and Water Development Appropriations Subcommittee, I helped create the fiscal year 2024 Energy and Water Appropriations Bill that focused on advancing our energy security and national security. Let me assure you that I will continue to do what I can to make sure we are focused on the importance of a strong domestic energy sector and a policy that will bring back energy independence to America. And so with that, thank you so much for allowing me to give you my speech today, and I'm looking forward to answering your upcoming questions.
Great, thank you, Congresswoman Letlow. It's great to hear from you. I've got a couple of questions that are specific to Louisiana. First off, you mentioned that Louisiana is a domestic powerhouse. You also mentioned some of the challenges that are happening right now with this current administration. How do those challenges impact your constituents there in Louisiana?
Yeah, so under this current administration, we've seen a decrease in domestic energy production, especially when it comes to oil and natural gas. And with the cancellation of the pipeline projects and limiting new ones from starting, there's a decrease in supply that's leading to some negative effects in our countries and our allies, namely an increase in gas prices. And at one point, Louisianans were paying nearly $5 per gallon per pump for their cars. And so we know that energy touches everything. We know that inflation is tied directly to energy production. So we have seen, because of these terrible policies that he put forward, an increase in inflation. It's all tied together. We know that everything starts with energy production.
You're absolutely right. And taking the next step into that, when you talk about energy production, the Department of Interior just announced its smallest lease in the history, the Department of Interior. And, that really impacts Louisiana. It also impacts the ability of producers to produce. And of course, when it comes to development and export to our allies, all big challenges. So when you think about, what the Department of Interior just did to just open up such a small part of land off the shore, how does that impact not only Louisianans and also the global market?
Sure. Well, I know that I, for one, was not pleased with that decision. And I know Louisiana is not pleased with that decision. When you lower the number of leases, you lower the number of jobs, you lower the production that we're seeing. Louisiana, I'm just reading it now, could lose close to 2.2 million with a decreased sales with that magnitude. So it definitely affects every part of Louisiana from our production. So this is a huge issue. I hear from people in the workforce. I hear from businesses in Louisiana that this absolutely has to be corrected. And I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that it is corrected.
Right. One, big issue facing Capitol Hill is permitting reform. A lot of red tape right now. It is very difficult to get anything built or constructed. You talked about Keystone, how easy that was to shut down by banning the cross-border permit, and how tough it is for companies to piece together a several 100-mile or a 2,000-mile pipeline to get oil or natural gas from the field down to Louisiana where it can be refined. What do you think about the changes with NEPA? Do they go far enough? Do we need to do more when it comes to permitting reform?
The bottom line is we have to find a way to streamline the permitting approval process, and in a way that benefits us and utilizes the resources and infrastructure that is waiting to be used. And there's way too many hoops to jump through that will not let anyone accomplish anything. earlier this year, signed on to the Lower Energy Cost Act that was put forward by my good friend and Congressman leader Steve Scalise, along with many of my colleagues, to reprioritize energy products and new projects. Included in HR 1 were significant changes to the NEPA process. It limits the scope of environmental reviews and sets a deadline for completion of reviews that will really help to speed up the approval and new energy projects. I also worked to get language included that relates to my seat on Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee that we were just talking about, that encourages the Army Corps to expedite the review time for the water quality certification process. So this is definitely something that we're keeping a close eye and ear on, and want to make sure that we're there to make those changes.
Great. So just last spring, I was down in Houma, Louisiana, where the only thing better than the food were the people. The place was fantastic. We got out there where they were building a boat. It was the first boat constructed in the United States to house offshore wind, and the thing's going to be a floating hotel. It was amazing. It's actually down there with your colleague. You mentioned Mr. Scalise. He was down there. It was his district. The thing was amazing. So when it comes to all the above energy, I mean, Louisiana is right in the middle of it when it comes to production, development, and even when it comes to offshore. What's your thinking around that? Like, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, well, I'm so glad that you brought up Houma, Louisiana, because that is a huge part of the state. And I know, as you mentioned, Steve Scalise was down there as well to talk about how we need an all of the above energy strategy. So to really get the U.S. back on track to energy independence, we're going to have to use all the resources at our disposal to generate energy of all kinds. So Louisiana's Gulf Coast has long been a leading energy producer, and whether that's oil or natural gas or even wind energy, we need to focus on keeping it that way. Offshore wind energy also supports our shipbuilding industry, which is huge in Louisiana, which you all witnessed in Houma.
Great. So I'd like to have one final question, Congresswoman. And again, thank you for your time today. But just this past week, I was up in New Hampshire and I heard Ambassador Nikki Haley on the campaign trail, and she made a comment saying that for all the jobs she's had, there haven't been a very long line for the women's restroom, right? That she was always one of the few women in the room. And I know, we talked earlier today that you broke the gender barrier for this webinar, that you are the first Congresswoman to appear. What's it been like for you in Congress as a single mom and representing your district, but having to be in Washington and being a part of history right now?
Yeah. Well, let me just say this. It's an absolute honor of a lifetime, something that I definitely don't take for granted. I still get goosebumps walking up and down these halls every day. But it's, I think me being here lends a bit of a different perspective. Women, every issue is a woman's issue, even oil and gas. But also, I can kind of bring a different perspective than some of my male counterparts. And while I appreciate everything everyone has to say, sometimes you see things a bit differently when you're walking in a single mom's shoes, for example, having a 6 and a 3-year-old, and just sitting around the table with my colleagues and can kind of share some of the issues that I care about, that I want to champion and work towards, and I can kind of lend a different voice. So I think personally we need even more women up here to help us champion those causes that affect all of us. But it truly is the honor of a lifetime. I think it's been close to 35 years since we've had a female representative from Louisiana. So I count myself truly blessed. And as long as the people will have me, I would love to continue to serve and lend my voice in Congress.
Great. Well, thank you very much for coming on today. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Now we're going to bring in the rest of the panelists. We've got 3 panelists today. We've got former Congressman Charlie Melanson from Louisiana, Gifford Briggs, who is Louisiana representative for the American Petroleum Institute, and Alex Hergott to talk about permitting from the Permitting Institute. So some good perspectives to share this afternoon. Congressman Melanson, let's start with you. We just heard from Congresswoman Letlow about the importance of the energy sector to Louisiana. In your opinion, what else could the administration and Congress be doing to help the sector? Excuse me, Congressman Melanson, you're on mute. I'm sorry.
Got it.
There you go.
There we go.
There you go.
I apologize.
That's all right.
They didn't hire me for my technical here. Anyway, the thing that they need to do is go back and revisit energy policy for the entire country. This decrease in the amount of the lease sales that's going on, it's not at a good time. The reserves that are out there are down by about half of what they should be, and heaven knows we get into with the world as it is and the turmoil that it is. This is not the time to leave those reserves half empty. We need to refill them. Price is still pretty good for oil, which reflects on the price of gas. And I think that if we're going to do it, we ought to act on it now. This administration should. Now, as Congresswoman Ledlow said, Louisiana is an all-in-one. I mean, we have been innovators in the oil and gas industry, in the energy industry as a whole, with the wind energy and the solar energy. You're starting to see these solar farms and the wind farms starting to pop up all around South and North Louisiana. We're not adverse to trying and perfecting everything that has to do with energy. After the BP oil spill, there were a lot of people hollering, screaming that you need to quit drilling oil. Look, the people in Louisiana were upset about what happened in the Gulf of Mexico, but they still stood strong by the oil and gas industry because they know the importance of that industry to this state and the bottom line in this state, not only taxes, but jobs, good jobs for the people of the state of Louisiana.
Thank you. Gifford, you know, Congresswoman Letlow mentioned that the Strategic Petroleum Reserve continues to be depleted. The administration continues to tap that. We're not refilling that as quickly as we should. We're also seeing a real challenge in the Middle East right now, combined with what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. As you see these threats around the globe, you know, what should the U.S. be doing to counter that, make sure that we remain energy secure here in the United States, but also that we're shipping and have the resources to send to our allies?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we could probably break that question down and speak for the next 30 or 45 minutes because there's a lot to unpack there. But I think first is to understand what the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is there for. It's supposed to be a safety net in the event of severe supply disruptions. And unfortunately, most recently, this administration is using it as a sort of a public relation band-aid to try and address high energy prices, which is not what the SPR is designed for. As of October 13th, our Strategic Petroleum Reserve has 351 million barrels of oil in it, which that sounds like a lot. That is enough to support our country for 17 days, right? So we are at a severe risk right now. If we were in a severe supply disruption where we had to rely on the SPR, we would be in trouble. So as Congressman Lawson said, we need to identify ways to begin filling that back up. And I think there's different levers that the administration can do to do that. But the real question is how do we make ourselves more energy secure? And the only way to really do that is to unleash American energy production. And that means oil and natural gas, but it also means all of the other forms of energy that we can. We need to identify ways that we can bring additional production online as quickly as possible. There's a lot of talk about permitting reform going through, and that's something that has to happen. But ultimately, there has to be a change in the administration's rhetoric and their approach to energy, because much of their approach right now has been antagonistic towards American energy production, where we're going to encourage less or regulate away production of oil and natural gas here in the United States, while simultaneously asking for other countries to produce more that we would then buy it from. That does not make our country more secure. In fact, it makes us less secure and more dependent on other countries. And we've seen recently that has not worked out very well for Europe, and we don't need to find ourselves in those situations.
So thank you. I'd like to turn to Alex just for a minute here. Alex, as I will talk about with the Congresswoman, permitting reform has been a hot topic on Capitol Hill. Delay to die litigation has forced lots of projects, whether they be pipelines or wind projects, offline. That we've not been able to build in this country, one of the most innovative countries in the world. In June, the Fiscal Responsibility Act sought to streamline some of that. Do you believe it went far enough? What else do we need to be doing here?
Thank you for that. In my 20 years in the U.S. Senate and then the 4 years in the White House at the Council on Environmental Quality and the National Economic Council, where we tried to shepherd projects over the finish line, this idea of permitting reform gets tossed out there in the same way that folks might talk about healthcare reform or tax reform. There's not really a monolith of permitting reform because there's 63 different environmental laws that split over 3 committees of jurisdiction in the Senate and 4 in the House, dealing with most environmental laws that were written more than 40 or 50 years ago. So the changes in the FRA that were mentioned by the Congresswoman, yes, are helpful, but they're about 2% of the solution. At the end of the day, those putting capital at risk for projects, whether it be equity transfer in Louisiana or Venture Global or down at Cameron Parish or Port Fourchon or LA1, and I can go down the list of all the potential that Louisiana has, is that 20 to 30% of all project cost is due to avoidable delays that if we just removed it, we could get out of our own way.
Excellent, thank you. I'd like to bring Congressman Melanson back. Congressman, Louisiana's energy sector embraces an all-the-above energy approach. We talked about a little bit with the Congresswoman, but it does draw on a lot of different ways of powering the sector. How do you believe this diversified energy strategy contributes to secure energy for both Louisiana and the United States?
Well, I mean, if you're producing and you have a constant flow of production, then you don't have gaps when you start having crises around the world. For instance, when Russia went into Ukraine, when they blew up the pipeline over there, then Europe was at risk. We came in and we filled in the gap. But if we don't have the lease sales, if we don't have the wind energy, the solar energy, the oil and gas, the LNG, and all the components of energy production, not only for our domestic needs, but also to help our allies and friends when we get in a situation such as the Ukraine situation, that allows us to have the capacity without having to have the hiccup of a week, 2 weeks, a month, to get that flow of products going. So it's a matter of we need to stay on top of our game and stay ahead of the curve, so that in critical times we're not caught flat-footed. Did you hear me?
Sorry. Thank you. And Gifford, liquefied natural gas exports have fueled Louisiana's rise as an energy powerhouse, but demand in Europe and across the globe continues to grow. How can the U.S. continue to meet that growing demand?
Yeah, sure. I think people from Louisiana would argue that Louisiana has always been an energy powerhouse, and it just the LNG is only further added to the important role that Louisiana plays not only in the U.S. energy market but the global energy market. And you've seen, I was working in Louisiana doing oil and gas work in 2007, and we were going around and talking about how we were importing natural gas because we had a 7-year supply of natural gas. And we showed the picture of the LNG tanker at Cheniere, where they had to reverse that flow and turn that into an export because of hydraulic fracturing and American energy innovation. And we went from a 7-year supply to a 200-year supply or more, depending on who you talk to. And that American innovation, a little over a decade later, a decade and a half later, saved Europe from maybe a worst case scenario, because we were able to not only export LNG to Europe, we were able to surge our export cargoes to Europe by 140%, protecting them from essentially not having the energy they needed to heat their homes and to provide electricity because of the war that was going on with Ukraine and Russia essentially shutting them off. If we want to continue to be the backstop for our allies in Europe and continue to provide the energy for the world, we have to be able to produce enough natural gas here to do both. We have to be able to produce enough natural gas here in the United States to provide the needs for our energy needs, for our utility infrastructure, for our manufacturing, for our processing facilities, as well as provide enough natural gas and the associated facilities to export not only to Europe, but to Asia and to South America and all over the world. And we have the resources to do it. We have the technology to do it. We have the skill set and the workforce to do it. We just need the policies of the administration to rise to meet that challenge.
Thank you. You know, Alex, I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into one of the things you said when you were on earlier, talking about how these infrastructure projects are capital intensive. I know that, you know, to build a pipeline is often several $100 million to a couple of $1 billion. We talk about transporting solar or wind energy from one place to another. The amount of capital investment and intense capital investment that is needed. And, you know, in order to get the money from a bank or to allow your shareholders to let you move forward with a project, you really need to be able to show that your project is going to be able to complete it, come online, and make money. What can the U.S. government do to help ensure that these projects can actually move forward, be constructed, and be brought online?
I mean, that's a great point. You know, the reality here is that 98% of all infrastructure in the country across all sectors, broadband, oil and gas pipelines, transmission, generation, offshore wind, are all funded. 98% are funded by the private sector. If there is an investment from the private sector to put capital at risk to actually rebuild, modernize, and expand the physical platform of our energy infrastructure, the government can't do it. So the idea is that for the first time in a long time, and as long as I've been working on permitting issues for the last 20 years of my life, the fates of all sectors now are linked. And just to give you an example, I started with the Coastal Restoration Mid-Barrier Project with Governor Jindal almost 10, 12 years ago, and then ended with Governor Bell Edwards. That's a coastal restoration project that took 6 years longer than it probably should have and cost Louisianans and the country as a whole millions of dollars that they shouldn't have had to spend on a beneficial use project. The reality here is the same thing holding back a renewable transmission line that connects a solar facility to the grid are the same permits, the same laws that are holding back oil and gas. So although we talk about permitting reform and the importance of reducing what we call abandonment risk, or the cost of capital that is needed to build these labor capital intensive projects, the reality here is if we don't make it easier on companies like a venture or energy transfer, DTE, they'll go elsewhere, right? Or they'll build elsewhere. And we will be missing a once in a lifetime opportunity to harness the largest federal investment in federal infrastructure in the history of our country, more so than the Depression. And now we actually have an opportunity where both sides, Republicans and Democrats alike, stand to risk a significant amount of political capital if they don't address this issue head on. And I can go into more detail on the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Rices Whale and offshore drilling, and how you can't just fix one sector without fixing them all. And the fact that we're actually at this pinnacle where we're actually having real adult conversations about how to move projects forward and reduce that 20 to 30%, which on project costs, which ultimately is borne by ratepayers and those building the projects. The fact that we're actually going to target and address that in a real way, not at the margins with what happened with the FRA NEPA changes. It's not just NEPA, and I'll end here. It's not just NEPA. It's the 56 other laws, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, Army Corps of Engineers, Essential Fish Habitat, the Endangered Species Act, Army Corps 404, and the Clean Water Act. All of those permits you have to get all along the way within a NEPA process. And on average, it takes 7 to 10 years to build a pipeline in this country. And countries far greener than us can do it in 2 years. What are we doing here?
Great points, Alex. Gifford, I know one of the primary policy issues that the API is working through is carbon capture and sequestration. I know it's important to Louisiana. We're seeing it in all other parts of the country too. How is it going in Louisiana? How is the policy being developed? And what can the U.S. government be doing to ensure that we can be doing more carbon sequestration or carbon capture and sequestration across the country?
Yeah, sure. So we spent a lot of our time focused, or my time, particularly in the Gulf Coast here, focused on CCS. And Louisiana is doing what it needs to do. It's put the policies and regulations in place that would provide for the permitting and the governance structure, the accountability, the oversight. All of those things that needed to be there have been put in place. They've requested primacy. So for those who don't know, primacy basically is the state of Louisiana has asked EPA to designate Louisiana the permitting authority for these wells. So instead of going to EPA to get a permit, where right now they're taking 3-4 years to get a permit because EPA is not really even acting on any of the permits that have been submitted to them. Instead of doing that, you would go to Louisiana to get primacy or to get your permit. Right now, North Dakota and Wyoming are the only 2 states that have primacy. Louisiana is next in line. We concluded a public comment period over the summer. That's all closed now. And so now the documents and everything rests in EPA's hand. Hopefully, they will grant Louisiana's request for primacy before the end of this year. And then once that happens, then Louisiana can begin or continue in some cases evaluating the permit applications and begin granting permits for companies to move forward with these CCS projects. I was hoping Congresswoman Letlow would get to stay on. She's got a really exciting CCS project going on in Columbia, Louisiana, called Strategic Biofuels. There's projects all over Southeast Louisiana, in the Florida parishes. You got projects in Southwest Louisiana, and these are all additional opportunities for many of those involved in the oil and gas industry to use the skill sets that we have, the understanding of the geology, the tidal work, the land work, all areas, to put all of those in place in a manner that will help sequester carbon, filter carbon emissions, and store them safely underground away from water and air. So Louisiana is doing its part. Now the next step rests with EPA to grant Louisiana their application for primacy.
Thanks a lot. And for the final question, I'd like to bring back Congressman Melanson, and we're going to take a little bit of a detour here, but before we join the group here, Congressman and I were talking about what's going on in Capitol Hill, and I asked him if he'd be able to and willing to talk a little bit from his perspective, what he sees, what's going on, and what he thinks needs to change when it comes to making sure that Capitol Hill is working for the people. So, Congressman Melanson, I'm going to give you the last word here on to give us your thoughts on what's going on in Capitol Hill right now.
Well, I think we're starting to see the accumulation of policies. Well, let's talk about reapportionment. Let's talk about money into political campaigns and those kind of things that have brought us to the point where we are. We've basically situated ourselves where either to the right or you to the left. I was a blue dog. There was a group called the Tuesday Morning Republicans when I was there. They were the moderate Republicans. We got along wonderfully. We talked, we exchanged ideas. When we had things we needed, we went to them. When they had things they needed, they came to us. We looked at perfecting legislation to make it work. I had a staffer that Peachy and I had lunch with in London, who's working for an international bank now, the other day, and she made the statement that when she started work with me, which was in 2005, she was given the packet of information to look at what we could do about negotiating drug prices for Medicare, Medicaid, the social services, and to make them affordable. 18 years later, we finally get negotiated pricing for drugs. Now, we're talking about permitting for oil and gas, and it's the same kind of problem. Getting those things, getting government to move fast, and that's probably where a lot of people that don't like government are coming from, is it doesn't move fast enough. Do you want it to move too fast? No, not that you don't want it to move fast, but too fast could be problematic in trying to make sure you got it right. Perfecting legislation is a matter of getting it right. So what we've gotten to now in Washington is, what's the old adage? If you continue to do the same thing that you've been doing and expecting a different outcome, shame on you. And that's what we've got going on right now. It's not going to change. They need to start communicating with and working with, whether it's administration, whether it's the Senate, whether it's Republicans and Democrats in the House. They're not getting things done. They're not governing. People in America expect the government to work for them. What we've seen right now is just as bad as any of the bureaucracy that people perceive as problematic at this point in time in our history. So Can it get fixed? Yeah. Will it take long? I hope not. I don't think we can stand it. I think we need to have action from both Republicans, Democrats, from all sectors, from the administration, the Senate, the House, to try and make this government start being functional and working for the people of this country.
Thank you very much, Congressman Alonso, and thank you for joining us. Thank you, Gifford and Alex, for being part of this discussion today. It's been really great, and also thank you to the Congresswoman for joining us earlier. And of course, thank you to all of you for joining us today. And please be on the lookout for our next webinar, which will be coming up soon. Have a good day.
Thank you.